Welcome back to Talking Politics with the Post Millennial. We have a great episode for you today. It's with Brian Lilley, the sort of political extraordinaire at the Toronto Sun. I'm an enormous fan of Brian Lilley. I read almost everything he writes. God knows what he's done to my sort of naive political brain, but there we are. So the episode had a few technical issues. The connection wasn't great, which was a shame. There was some construction, but do forgive us. We're trying our best to provide you with content, and hopefully you enjoy it. Welcome back to Talking Politics. Today we have Brian Lilley, the political extraordinaire at the Toronto Sun, the sort of very prolific writer, and I read you almost daily, which is wonderful.
Thank you.
Analysis on Canadian news. So anyway, thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate it.
My pleasure, Nico.
So I think a good place to start would be, how do you think Justin Trudeau has handled the lockdown? Do you think people will look back on this crisis and think that he was a good leader?
I think that right now that's how people are viewing him. And quite frankly, if you look at how people are viewing political leaders of all stripes, in Canada anyway, it's different in the States. They've never given up their partisan bickering down in the States, and good on them. But here in Canada, I can tell you, I might lean conservative, but I criticize Doug Ford on a regular basis.
Yeah.
Well, I get the same types of replies when I criticize Doug Ford as I get when I criticize Justin Trudeau. How dare you, we're in a crisis, get behind the leader.
Yeah.
Well, the leader's going to do some things right, and they're going to do some things wrong. And I have been complimentary of Trudeau when he's done things right. Look, I'm not a fan of big government intervention in the economy. I generally opposed to it. But when the government is shutting down your business and you're either the owner, you've got to keep paying for the lighting bill, for the rent, for all your overhead costs. You've got your employees to worry about. It's not wrong for the government to come in and say, okay, we need you to shut down for the good of the country. So we're going to help you out. And in the same way, it's right for the government to say, "What, Nico, you can't work anymore because we won't let you, but here's some money." That is a proper use of government, even for a conservative. And so in his initial setup for the emergency aid package, I was actually complimentary and said, of course, devil is in the details, but this looks good. It's comprehensive. And then it went south right away. Remember, there was going to be a 10% wage subsidy to keep people tied to their jobs. They quickly found out that wasn't going to work, and it had to be, they were going to put it up to 75%, like a lot of European countries, and it took them weeks. In the meantime, the United States had done something similar, but done it in a different way, and the money was in the bank accounts, helping businesses keep their employees on the payroll.
Right. But as you said, Justin Trudeau's approval ratings are at an all-time high, it seems, at least in this mandate. And if you compare it to a few months ago during the shutdown Canada protests, it might as well be a different leader. I think the Conservatives are going to have a really difficult time defeating Justin Trudeau in the next election. Would you concur?
Oh, yeah. And I keep seeing people saying Justin Trudeau's doing an awful job. Why won't the opposition bring him down? Well, if you think the opposition can bring him down right now, you don't know how our parliamentary system works. And even if they did bring him down, what would that do? Okay, we'd have a COVID election and he'd win massively. Yeah. So, why would you bother doing that? And the Conservatives don't even have a leader. Right now, they're going to continue on, I guess, until August before they pick one. We have to remember Trudeau's in a minority. There's a good chance that after this, while his popularity is still high, he could turn around and call an early election once we're through the worst of COVID. And, we're not worried about a second wave or worried about politicians knocking on your door asking for your vote. So he could definitely win. Now, back to your earlier question of how has he handled it, the federal government overall has handled it horribly. There are two big problems. You're in Montreal, I'm in Toronto. The two big problems that have caused most of the deaths and most of the harm. There's one federal, one provincial. And the federal one is they didn't close the borders. They didn't do anything with the borders. And I was flying internationally at that time when they should have been acting, and they didn't. And the second one is that both the Ontario and provincial governments, Ontario and Quebec governments specifically, should have done more to protect seniors in long-term care. Yeah. And that's been, but you know, I can say that overall Ontario's done well. I can't say the same for Quebec, which is kind of like our New York State in terms of, it's not as bad as New York State, I don't think, but it's, I'd have to check the numbers again.
Yeah, well, it's certainly getting there. And you did write, when we first heard about coronavirus and trying to deal with it, you wrote in favor of a lockdown pretty early on. Now it seems you're in favor of sort of speeding up the lifting of economic restrictions. Is it the right time now, do you think?
Well, it's the right time in Ontario. In Quebec, it depends where you are. If you're up in the Gaspésie, I guess you're fine. You know, it's why I'm getting more of this regional dissension than I was experiencing before. Is, you know, as I get emails and messages on social media, people are saying, well, I live in Thunder Bay, you know, which is a pretty small town, small city, between Winnipeg and where? You know, what's the next city on the Ontario side? Yeah. And they don't have cases. And they're saying, well, why can't we open up fully? And if you're in, you know, St. Gabriel de Brandon in Quebec, why can't you open? If you're in Prince Edward Island, why can't you open? And that's why Manitoba and Saskatchewan have taken a very different route than the rest of the country. You can get a haircut in those places now, by the way, and not just the home jobbies that you and I are doing, Nico, with the buzzers going up the sides. You can go see a barber. A woman can go to a hair salon. Let freedom ring. I was in favor of, you know, I've been writing so much, I don't remember everything I've written, but, you know, I was an early advocate. I think we got our first case here in Ontario. Ontario got the first several cases, and then BC kind of took over. We got our first case here January 25th. And on January 27th, I was writing about how we need to start putting measures in at the border, specifically for flights coming in from China, because at that point, there were no hotspots outside of China. Everyone was worried about it exporting. It was just a week earlier that China had said they were dealing with a pandemic. So we should have done that. That should have been the early initial steps. And I flew down to Florida to see my parents. The Americans, by February 12th, when I was getting on my plane at Pearson, the Americans had been telling me for days, I think I was flying United, and I'm getting text messages and emails. If you've been to China in the last 2 weeks, you cannot enter if you're not a U.S. citizen. And if you are a U.S. citizen, you must be quarantined for 2 weeks. We weren't doing that. We were still bringing in 20,000 people a week from China, including people coming directly from Wuhan. And we were suggesting that you might want to go home and self-isolate if you're feeling bad. You know, we had people coming through with symptoms. The first case spoke to people and, you know, cough. He had a cough. He's coming from Wuhan. And they're like, oh, okay, well, when you get home, call public health. And that didn't change for the longest time. Now, Dr. Tam, just the other day at a Commons Health Committee, has admitted, yeah, we should have shut the borders earlier. Yet, just days before they finally shut down the borders, it was still being described as, you know, not something to do, counterproductive. No, they should have shut down the borders early on, especially from hotspots. At first it was China, then it became Iran, then Egypt. And by the time they did anything, it was actually too late in many ways to help. And that's why we were dealing with the community spread, which most of the country's done very well with in terms of, you know, our deaths per 100,000 are third lowest in the G7. I know everyone thinks America's bad, orange man bad, orange man make everyone sick. You know, that's what you'll get online. Reality is that Britain, France, Italy, are actually far worse than the United States.
Yeah.
Then you get to the United States. Then you get to us. In United States is about 25 deaths per 100,000. France is about 40, and Britain and Italy are up around hovering around the 50 mark. We're down around 14 per 100,000. Ontario is actually lower at 11. 11 or 12. You guys in Quebec keep dragging us up, but we've done fairly well. We're only being beaten by Germany, which is around 10 deaths per 100,000, and Japan, which isn't even at 1 because they put in very strict measures at the beginning. Yeah. We should have been doing that as well. We could have protected ourselves the way Japan did, the way Australia did. If you think we have a lot of trade and a lot of back and forth with China, look to Australia, and they're close in size, close enough, and similar way that where their population is huddled around a different border, the coast. So similar population patterns. They handled this much better than we did.
Yeah. The border thing, I think, is a particularly interesting issue. And the reason why is that I think it was an ideological based decision rather than it being based on any data or statistics. And in fact, they didn't want to close the border because to do that is to be terribly reactionary, and it probably won't work anyway because it's so globalized. And as we've seen today with Dr. Tam finally admitting that they should have done it earlier, is, I think, the most serious mistake of the entire lockdown. But then again, Trudeau's approval ratings are, sky high, and nobody seems to notice it. Why is that?
They don't seem to notice it. It's wartime president. The American president goes to war, their approval rating goes up. Yeah. So there was a whole movie about that, Wag the Dog, where just knocking over a water bottle. Wonderful. I'll just move that. The movie Wag the Dog, where they talked all about this, with a fictional Bill Clinton starting a war to distract from troubles he was having. Mm. So we're in the same sort of mindset here in Canada, rally to the leader, and to a large part, good. And, I will remind everyone that the Conservatives and the NDP generally supported the government's attempts to do something. Now, I have to give them both credit. They both came up with ideas to help workers, to help small businesses that the Liberals hadn't thought of in their haste. And, it normally takes years to develop these policies, so I'll cut them some slack on that. I was in Ottawa for a long time, covering the Hill for close to 10, 15 years. It takes sometimes that long, ideas float around before they're ever put into being, definitely a year or two, and they were putting together policies on the fly. And so they would come and say, okay, well, here's an idea, and we're going to help people. And at first, the Liberals resisted any changes, and eventually they realized the NDP and the Conservatives had some good ideas. It's like, well, hold on, if you do it this way, it'll move faster, it'll help more people. That's good. Now they've stopped listening. Now they've stopped answering questions. And eventually, I hope that the public realizes that all Justin Trudeau is doing with his daily morning show is commandeering the airwaves so that he can tell you new ways he's going to put money in your pocket. Yeah. He's not, he is, while the premiers are doing the heavy lifting of dealing with this, while the premiers are doing the heavy lifting of deciding when and if to reopen their economies, he's just handing people money to try and stop you from going back to work.
Yeah, it is interesting. On another note that I wanted to bring up, you've also been quite outspoken about Trudeau's gun ban. Now, yeah. Do you think this is going to bring down gun crime at all?
I'll give you a short answer. No.
Why is he doing
it? He's doing it because he is philosophically against civilians owning firearms. There were 5 shootings in the Toronto area last night. None of them involved the guns that he's banning.
Yeah.
The crime problem that we're dealing with that involves firearms in Canada, overwhelmingly gang-related, overwhelmingly involves handguns. This is not me. This is not speculation. This is Statistics Canada. You know, and we're supposed to believe the data. This is a government that believes in evidence-based policy. Until this comes along, in which case they sent an intern onto Google and said, find all the scary-looking guns so we can ban them. They focused on the AR-15. And I've questioned Trudeau directly on this, including during the election campaign. Why are you banning a gun with no history of gun crime in Canada? And he does what everyone does. He resorts to emotion or outright lying. You know, yeah, the AR-15's been used in a lot of horrible mass shootings in the United States. Let me check my my location. No, I'm still not in the United States, and my passport still says Canada on it. So we have a different country, we have different culture, we have different laws. We have strict gun control laws already in Canada. What you hear the Democrats calling for in the United States, we already have. We full-on background check. You have to take safety courses. You are vetted by the RCMP. You get anything that shows up in the police database that would preclude you from owning a gun, your name's going to pop and they're going to come and take your guns away. Unless you're Gabriel Wortman, the Nova Scotia shooter, who only had illegal guns smuggled in from the United States, or in the case of one of his handguns, purchased in Canada. And I've written about this several times. I believe that the reason the RCMP is not telling us what type of firearms he used is that one of the guns is a stolen Smith & Wesson 5946. That is the RCMP specific model. It's only made for them. It's only used by them in Canada. That is the gun that was sourced in Canada. He found a way, because this guy wanted to be full-on mount, he found a way to get it.
Yeah.
So this tragedy, this massacre, this horrific event happens, and Justin Trudeau says, well, let's ban all the guns. Now's our chance. And, you know, they've caught up actual hunting rifles in this ban. They've banned 22s that look scary. Basically, they're following, the Liberals don't come up with original ideas anymore. They don't do the intellectual groundwork anymore. They follow what the Democrats do in the United States. And that's what they're doing here. None of the guns on this list are crime guns. Taking guns away from legal gun owners does not take away any guns from the criminals. I was on a panel recently with the guy who used to import guns for gangs in his previous life. Now he tries to get people out of the gang life. After serving time, he turned his life around and he tries to help them. And I said to him, you know, because the ban hadn't happened, but we knew it was coming. I said, will this stop people like the guy you once were, or the people that you used to sell to? And he said, no, not at all. He laughed, in fact.
Yeah, it seems to be a terribly symbolic policy, which isn't going to have any practical use whatsoever. But that seems to become a staple of the Trudeau government. But anyway, moving to Ontario politics, Steven Del Duca was recently elected Liberal leader. And I saw last week he shot himself in the foot by trying to criticise Doug Ford's cheesecake video. What do you think about Del Duca? How would you explain him to perhaps the people who don't know who he is?
Well, first let me mention the cheesecake video. Doug Ford, like Justin Trudeau, his popularity is through the roof. I saw one poll that put him at 87% approval rating. This is a guy who was down in the 20s just a few months ago while he was fighting with teachers and others. So his popularity is through the roof. He's done a pretty good job of moving things along and handling this. And in fact, a very good job of handling it. I think he needs to move on the economy, but the population's not there yet. Ontario, every time they do polling, Ontario is the most skittish population in the country about reopening. People want to stay home. Yeah. So against that backdrop, you get this new Liberal leader, and Ford does this cheesecake video. First, I heard about it. I was like, Premier's going to make cheesecake? He mentioned it in one of his news conferences as he was talking about baking and how people are surviving the lockdown. And he said, oh, by the way, I make the best cheesecake recipe. Well, his office was flooded with requests. So he goes and makes this video and shows you how to make it. It's a very 1970s, everything's prepackaged type of way of making a cheesecake. He didn't offer to share any with the media. I did put in a request. So did many of my colleagues. We all want to taste the thing. He says it's the best. but it took off and it struck a chord with people. Del Duca's people started telling me, oh, he's doing his own video. Oh, he's shooting it in his kitchen. And they made it sound to me in the lead up that they were going to do something like Ford and try and humanize him. And they didn't. You said he shot himself in the foot. I think you're right. He surrounded himself with all the trappings. You know, there was baking powder out on the table. There's a big bag of flour. There was a stand mixer there. And then he talked about people dying.
Yeah.
And it became very somber. And it was a turnoff. And even a lot of liberals were reacting. You know, and the online world is not the same as the regular world in many respects, especially Twitter, where people already have their partisan minds made up. But even liberals were heavily criticizing him. So, you know, Del Duca he's going to have a tough hill to climb. The NDP has been absolutely horrible, even before this pandemic. I've said from the beginning of the Ford government, if they faced a real opposition, they'd be in serious trouble.
Yeah.
But the NDP is so bloody awful. They're absolutely useless. Until COVID came along, they asked the same questions pretty much every day. The legislature took almost 6 months off. They came back. They were still asking the same questions they'd asked before. When the license plate, you know, I don't know if that made news out your way, the problems with Ontario's license plates. When that became the big story that everyone's talking about, they stood up and asked about autism funding and strikes for teachers. Same questions they'd been asking for months upon months upon months, about a year. Instead of pivoting and saying, Premier, you run a label company and you just screwed up license plates, they left that. It was like the fifth or sixth question they asked, and they didn't put a lot of effort into it. So Del Duca had an opening to come in because the NDP, I don't think, will ever be in power in Ontario again, not in my lifetime. I could be wrong in this, you know, saying this to you could come back to haunt me. But the Liberals had an opening, and they chose Del Duca, a guy who was part of the Wynne government, a guy who does, even he admits, has a charisma deficit. He talked about that the day he won. And then he does that video. So, you know, he ran a good leadership campaign to sew things up as quickly as he did. But, you know, winning inside your party where you can go in and take over riding associations is a lot different than going door to door and convincing people that you should vote for them. He's got 2 years, so it could still happen, but Doug Ford also has 2 years. And if he, you know, brings Ontario out of this crisis on the economic front and does well, he's going to get back in.
And Del Duca has a scandalous past as well. As you said, he worked in the Wynne government. And in that time, he managed to get wrapped up with all these sort of transport issues where he sort of put GO stations in his own riding needlessly. And it seems like they just totally chose the wrong person to defeat Ford. And again, I worked in the Ford government very early days, in the first few months, actually. And I remember it was, we ran into sort of disaster after disaster. So on your point about the NDP, yeah, if we had a solid opposition, I don't think Ford would be still around, really.
If the NDP, especially that first year, when everything the government touched seemed to fall apart, at least publicly. I've always said that there's not a lot of similarities between Trump and Doug Ford, despite the fact that the left likes to make them. There's not a lot of actual similarities. And if you know Doug, then you realize they're two very different people. But the similarities in how their governments were operating is that there was always this circus out front, and behind the scenes, stuff was getting done. And same thing with Trump, same thing with Ford. Circus out front, everything looks like it's falling apart. Behind the scenes, changes actually being made, significant changes. And that was a good thing. But in terms of public support and popularity, in that first year, if the NDP had been effective, it would have gotten to the point where Doug Ford would have been forced out by his own party. He would have been knifed in the back by cabinet ministers looking to take over and say, oh, we've got to save, you've got to go because we've got to save this. And, he fired his former chief of staff, Dean French, brought in new hands to steady things. And for the most part, it's worked. And he was on his way back up. Then COVID happened. And, well, as I told you earlier, look, good chunk of my audience never likes it when I criticize Doug Ford, but I've never been a person that says, well, I lean this way, so I can't criticize the blue team. No, I'm probably going to be one of your hardest critics. You can ask Stephen Harper how fun it was having me write a weekly column and do a daily TV show when he was prime minister with his majority for 4 years.
Yeah. So final topic, the Conservative leadership contest. I hate to force you into a corner here, but who do you think is going to win?
Well, early on, I definitely thought it was Peter MacKay. He had the name recognition, which in politics that's it, right? Like, I'll tell you who won't win, and that's Derek Sloan. Derek Sloan, he was always a long shot to get in. I knew as soon as he had the backing of certain segments of the social conservative movement that he would at least do a decent enough show, but he's made himself unelectable to the general population with some of his missteps. Leslyn Lewis, who also has the backing of different segments of the social conservative movement, has impressed an awful lot of people.
Yeah,
I've had several tell me that they're thinking of putting her first ballot just to say, all right, I'm impressed. Enough for her to win? Probably not, but these are people who are saying, trying to decide between Peter MacKay and Erin O'Toole. They can't really decide, so they're going to put Leslyn Lewis first, and they're still trying to decide whether it be Peter or Erin as second. Peter MacKay came out with a very good launch, and I don't just say that because I got the exclusive interview with him on the day of his launch. We all knew he was going, but we did a big sit down, and I covered MacKay for a long time, but didn't know him all that well. I've gotten to know him better outside of politics. And he answered all the questions. Are you a red Tory? He's not. He is and he isn't, I guess. Same with O'Toole. But, MacKay had that good launch and was saying all the right things. The last couple months, though, his campaign has tripped all over itself while O'Toole has been running a very good and effective campaign. I mean, they put out that letter trying to say that we've gotten over adversity in the past. And instead they said, we've gotten over diversity in the past. So then that becomes a story. And, I know that it wasn't, hey, let's do dog whistle to the racist far right and get them on our side. That wasn't what he was thinking about, but that becomes part of the storyline then. So that is shooting yourself in the foot. And there have been other dumb mistakes and then things they've had to pull back. So I think MacKay may still have it, but it's, I said at the beginning, don't underestimate O'Toole. In the last leadership race that Scheer won, O'Toole came in third, and he went from a place where one of his people said, reporters were calling up and saying, when is she available for an interview? They didn't know Erin O'Toole was a man. That's how little name recognition he had, and he came in third. So don't count him out for winning early on. He could pull this off, but Leslyn Lewis is going to surprise people in how well she does. If she does as well as I think she will, she's got a future in this party, especially carrying the banner in the GTA.
Yeah. Well, who do you think is more electable between Peter MacKay and Erin O'Toole? Who has a better chance at defeating Justin Trudeau?
With the general public, maybe Peter MacKay because of name recognition. He's older than Justin Trudeau by 6-7 years. Peter MacKay's mid-50s, still in good shape, still looking good. He's got a beautiful family. So does O'Toole. O'Toole looks older than Trudeau, though, because O'Toole is... Trudeau and I are both 49 this year. O'Toole is about 2 years younger than us, but he doesn't look it. You know, he's got that balding middle-aged man thing. So is that enough to take on the coif? In parts of the general public, that's what the election will come down to, as sad as it sounds. I remember when Trudeau was first running for leadership, one of my then colleagues, David Aiken, who's over at Global now, he drove out to, it was around St. Albert's, Ontario, east of Ottawa on the way to Montreal. And Trudeau's going to speak at a small community theater. And Aiken's listening as these two women in their 60s sit there talking about Trudeau, about how dreamy he is, and they wouldn't kick him out of bed for eating crackers. And at that point, he came back to the office the next day and he said, well, Trudeau's won. You know, we knew he would win, and I hate to admit to the part that I played in making him Liberal leader, hosting that fight night on TV and raising his profile. But unfortunately, that really did help him move up there. Beating Justin Trudeau is always going to be tough. If people see how he's actually done, he becomes beatable. But you know, both McKay and O'Toole can win in the GTA. That's where you need to win. In Quebec, you only need to win in the Quebec City area and pick up a few seats in the region if you can. That's the best the Conservatives can hope for. And both of them have roots in Atlantic Canada. So, you know, I think either one of them could beat Trudeau, but it's going to be a tough slog.
Right. Well, Brian, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Oh, you're absolutely welcome.